The people you trust most are the ones manipulating you best. Not with lies, with listening. They've figured out that you don't need to deceive someone to control them. You just need to make them feel understood. So they nod at the right moments. They ask follow-up questions. They remember small details from previous conversations. They mirror your energy. They validate your feelings. And you think you found someone special, someone who really gets you. You haven't. You found someone who studied how to make you comfortable enough to be careless. Every detail you share, they're filing away. Every weakness you reveal, they're cataloging. Every fear you admit, they're storing for future use. This isn't connection, this is reconnaissance. And the reason it works so well is because it feels exactly like friendship, exactly like trust, exactly like safety, until one day you realize they know everything about you and you know almost nothing about them. By then, it's too late. You know what's happening right now. In this very moment, you're listening to me. And I haven't asked you a single question. I haven't demanded your attention. I haven't forced you to lean in. Yet here you are, engaged, present, waiting for what comes next. This is the secret that most people miss their entire lives. Influence isn't loud. Real influence whispers. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear a badge that says, I'm influencing you now. The greatest conductors don't wrestle with their orchestras. They simply raise a hand. And 60 musicians respond as one. Not because of force, because of flow. Let me tell you about a man I met years ago named Hassan. He owned a textile factory in Indonesia, employed about 200 workers. Good man, hardworking, paid fair wages, treated people with respect. But Hassan had a problem that was eating him alive. His factory floor was silent. Not the productive kind of silence, the heavy kind, the uncomfortable kind. Workers came in, operated their machine, and left. No conversation, no connection, no community. And the numbers reflected it. Productivity was average at best. Mistakes were climbing. People were quitting without explanation. Hassan tried everything he knew. He organized team meetings. Nobody talked. He created suggestion boxes. They stayed empty. He even hired a consultant who came in with surveys and personality assessments and all kinds of fancy tools. Nothing changed. The silence remained. Then one day, Hassan did something that seemed completely unrelated to his problem. He installed a tea station in the corner of the factory floor. Not in the break room, right there where people worked. Fresh tea, all day long. He didn't make an announcement, didn't send a memo, just put it there. The first day, a few curious workers approached during their break. They made tea. They stood there drinking it. And because they were standing there together, doing nothing but drinking tea, something remarkable happened. They started talking, not about work, about life, about their families, about the cricket match from the weekend. Within 2 weeks, that corner became the heartbeat of the factory. Within a month, Hassan noticed something extraordinary. Productivity increased by 18%. Error rates dropped. People stopped quitting. The entire atmosphere transformed. And Hassan never said a word about communication or teamwork or any of that corporate language. He simply created a space where conversation could happen naturally. This is what most people don't understand about making people talk. You cannot force it. The moment you try to extract conversation from someone, you kill it. It's like trying to grab smoke with your fist. The tighter you squeeze, the less you hold. Communication doesn't respond to pressure. It responds to permission, to safety, to environment. When you create the right conditions, people don't need to be asked to talk. They need to be given the space to do it naturally. Think about the people you know who ask too many questions. How was your day? What did you do? How did that make you feel? What are you thinking about? Exhausting, isn't it? These people think they're showing interest, but what they're really doing is interrogating. And what do people do when they're interrogated? They shut down, they give short answers, they escape the conversation as quickly as possible. Now think about the people in your life who seem to know everything about everyone. They're not asking more questions. They're creating more comfort. There's a principle here that applies to every area of your life. In business, in marriage, in parenting, in leadership. Magnetic presence always defeats pushy personality. Always. A magnet doesn't chase iron. It doesn't beg. It doesn't demand. It simply exists with such power that iron moves toward it involuntarily. When you develop this quality in yourself, people move toward you. They want to tell you things. They volunteer information. They seek your presence. And you never had to ask. Now, let me tell you about Victor. Quiet man from Prague, worked as an executive in a European manufacturing company. Victor barely spoke in meetings, while everyone else was fighting for airtime, presenting their ideas, arguing their points. Victor sat there, watching, listening, taking notes. His colleagues thought he was passive, weak even. They couldn't have been more wrong. Over the course of 2 years, Victor became the most influential person in that boardroom. Not because he talked more, because he mastered something most people never learn. Strategic silence. When Victor did speak, every head turned. Why? Because he only spoke when he had something essential to say. He never wasted words on obvious observations or political maneuvering. He watched the room. He understood the dynamics. He knew exactly when to insert a single sentence that would shift the entire conversation. But here's what made Victor truly masterful. He asked questions that made people think out loud, not interrogation questions, reflection questions. What would happen if we removed that constraint? Who benefits most from this decision? Simple questions that created a vacuum. And nature abhors a vacuum. People rush to fill the silence with their thoughts, their concerns, their ideas. And Victor, he just listened. Collected intelligence, built influence. Without anyone realizing it was happening, you see. People talk more when you talk less. This sounds simple, but it violates everything we've been taught about being engaging or interesting or influential. We think we need to perform, to entertain, to fill every silence with our wisdom. But the truth is opposite. When you create space in a conversation, when you resist the urge to fill every gap, something powerful happens. The other person feels that space and instinctively moves to fill it. They talk, they open up, they reveal themselves. Not because you extracted it from them, because you made room for it. This is the foundation everything else builds on. Understanding that influence isn't about what you do to people, it's about what you allow to happen between people. It's about becoming the kind of presence that makes speaking feel natural, safe, inevitable. Here's something fascinating about human nature. We're wired to complete patterns. Show someone half a melody, they'll hum the rest in their mind. Tell them the beginning of a story, they'll stay awake wondering about the ending. This isn't manipulation, this is understanding how we're built. Curiosity works like gravity. You don't see it, but it pulls. And when you understand this force, you can use it to create conversations that sustain themselves without any effort from you. Most people approach conversation like they're building a wall, brick by brick, complete thought by complete thought, everything explained, everything finished. Then they wonder why nobody engages. Because there's nothing left to engage with. You've done all the work. You've answered all the questions before they were asked. You've closed every loop. But what if you left something open? What if you planted something incomplete? Not as a trick, but as an invitation. I watched this principle work perfectly in a woman named Chinwe. She sold fabric in a crowded Lagos market where hundreds of vendors competed for the same customers. Every other seller was shouting, "Best prices, come see, beautiful fabric, special discount today." Their voices blended into noise. But Chinwe, she sat quietly at her stall, arranging her fabrics into patterns. When someone walked past, she might say softly, "That pattern tells an interesting story." That's it, nothing more. And you know what happened? People stopped. "What story?" they'd ask. And Chinwe would smile and begin folding the fabric slowly, preparing it for display. Well, the woman who wore this pattern to her daughter's wedding, and she'd pause, adjust the fabric, take her time. The customer would lean in. What happened at the wedding? Now, Chinwe had something most vendors never get: time, attention, genuine curiosity. She wasn't selling anymore, she was sharing. The customer wasn't being sold to, they were participating in something. By the time Chinwe finished her story, the customer had handled the fabric, imagined themselves in it, connected emotionally to it. The sale happened naturally. But here's what made Chinwe brilliant. She'd never told the whole story at once. She'd mentioned something in passing. Of course, that was before the tailor discovered the mistake, and she'd moved to help another customer. The first customer would wait. What mistake? They needed to know. They needed completion. This works everywhere. In your office, in your home, in every relationship you have. When you give people complete information, you give them a reason to leave. When you give them partial information packaged with genuine value, you give them a reason to stay. But notice something crucial here. Chinwe wasn't being deceptive. She was being strategic. She had real stories, real value, real connection. She just understood timing. She understood rhythm. She understood that conversation is like music. The rests between notes matter as much as the notes themselves. Think about the best conversations you've ever had. They weren't speeches. They were exchanges, back and forth, give and take, like a tennis match where both players are skilled enough to keep the ball in play. But here's what most people miss. You can't have that kind of exchange if you hit every ball back immediately with maximum force. You'll exhaust the other person. They'll stop wanting to play instead. You need to create loops, natural points where the conversation can circle back. You mention something briefly, then move on. Later, the other person brings it up again. Wait, you said something earlier about, and now you're not pushing the conversation, they're pulling it. I learned this from watching how children play. A child doesn't explain the entire game before starting. They begin playing and invite you in. Be the dragon, they'll say. You don't know the rules yet. You don't know what the dragon does, but you're already involved. You're already asking questions. What does the dragon do? And the child reveals the game piece by piece. Through play, they've made you a participant without you realizing when you transition from observer to player. Now here's where people get this wrong. They think this means being mysterious for the sake of mystery, being vague for the sake of being vague. That's not what this is. That's just being annoying. The difference is value. Every piece of information you share, even when incomplete, must carry genuine value. It must give something. It must mean something. It must matter. When you do that, the incompleteness isn't frustrating. It's intriguing. People lean in because they sense there's something worth leaning in for. There's an ancient principle at work here. Give before you ask. Plant before you harvest. Invest before you withdraw in conversation. This means you cannot come to people with your hand out. You cannot approach every interaction as a transaction. I'll talk to you, so you'll talk to me. I'll share, so you'll share. People feel that. They sense when they're being traded with, and they resist it. But when you give first with no immediate expectation, something shifts. The human instinct for reciprocity kicks in. Not because you demanded it, because they feel it. I've seen leaders destroy trust by violating this principle. They gather their team and say, I need everyone to be more open and honest. Then they sit back and wait. Nothing happens because they ask for withdrawal before making deposits. Compare that to a leader who shares first, who makes themselves slightly vulnerable first, who admits a mistake first, who asks for help first. Suddenly the team opens up, not because they were commanded to, because they were shown how, because safety was demonstrated, not just requested. This is the architecture of natural dialogue. You're not constructing it piece by piece with effort and force. You're creating conditions where it constructs itself. You're planting seeds that grow into conversations you never have to maintain because they're maintaining themselves. The person you're speaking with doesn't realize you've done anything at all. They just know they enjoy talking to you. They just know, they trust you. They just know that somehow. Around you, words flow easier. Where you stand changes what you say. I mean that literally. The physical space around a conversation shapes the conversation itself. You've experienced this without naming it. Think about the meetings that happen in boardrooms versus the conversations that happen in coffee shops. Same people, different space, completely different quality of communication. In the boardroom, people perform, they present, they defend. In the coffee shop, they think out loud, they wonder, they admit uncertainty. The space gave them permission. This isn't accidental, this is design. And once you understand it, you can create environments that make people want to talk. Not because you're charismatic, not because you ask the right questions, because the space itself invites openness. I've watched organizations transform not by changing their communication training, but by changing where communication happens. Move a difficult conversation from an office to a walking path, watch what changes. Remove the desk between you and another person. Notice how the dynamic shifts. Sit beside someone instead of across from them. Feel the difference in what gets said. But let me tell you about someone who understood this at a level most people never reach. His name was Rajesh. Drove a taxi in Toronto for 17 years. Now you might think driving a taxi is simple. Pick people up, drop them off. But Rajesh turned that taxi into something else entirely. He turned it into a confessional, a therapy session, a place where strangers told him things they'd never told anyone, and he did it the same way. With every single passenger, the moment someone got in his cab, Rajesh did 3 things. First, he adjusted his rearview mirror so he could see the passenger's eyes, but only if he chose to look. He wasn't staring, he was available. Second, he played music, not loud, not intrusive, just present, something instrumental, something that filled the silence without demanding attention. Third, and this is crucial, he never asked where they were going immediately. He'd pull away from the curb, slowly, and he'd say something observational. Not about them, about the world. Traffic's moving better than yesterday. That restaurant on the corner finally opened. Something neutral, something that required no response. So what Rajesh understood was temperature. Every person who got into his taxi came in at a certain emotional temperature. Some were cold, closed off, armored. Some were warm, ready to engage. Most were somewhere in between. And Rajesh never tried to change that temperature immediately. He matched it first. If someone was quiet, he stayed quiet. If someone seemed talkative, he gave them something to talk about. He became a thermostat, not a thermometer. A thermometer just reads temperature. A thermostat adjusts it gradually, comfortably, without the system even noticing it's being changed. After a few minutes of matching, Rajesh would do something brilliant. He'd share a tiny piece of his own story. Not a long story, not a dramatic story, just something real. My daughter started university this week. The house feels different. That's it. No request for response, no fishing for engagement, just a human moment offered freely. And here's what happened consistently. The passenger would respond, not always immediately, sometimes 5 minutes later, but they'd respond. How old is your daughter? Or, I remember when my kids left home. Or, I'm actually heading to visit my son at school right now. The door opened. Not because Rajesh pushed it, because he showed it was safe to open. By the time passengers reached their destination, they had told Rajesh about their marriages, their fears, their dreams, their struggles, complete strangers. And they'd leave his taxi feeling lighter, feeling heard, often leaving bigger tips than the fare itself. Some gave him their phone numbers. If you ever need anything, they trusted him completely. A man they'd known for 15 minutes. Why? Because Rajesh had mastered something most people fight against their entire lives. He'd learned to reflect without mimicking, to match without mocking, to create resonance. There's neuroscience behind this. When someone feels understood, their brain releases oxytocin, the bonding chemical, the trust chemical. But you can't manufacture understanding. You can't fake it successfully over time. What you can do is develop genuine curiosity about how other people experience the world. When you're curious, really curious, your body language shifts naturally. Your voice adjusts naturally. Your pace matches naturally. You're not performing empathy, you're experiencing it. And people feel that difference, even if they can't name it. I've watched leaders fail at this because they learned it as technique instead of developing it as character. They took courses on mirroring body language, so they'd sit across from someone and deliberately copy their posture. And it felt creepy, uncomfortable, because it was mechanical. It was manipulation dressed up as connection. Real reflection happens when you're so present with another person that your nervous systems begin to sync, not because you're trying, because you're genuinely there. This is why some people can walk into any room and within minutes, everyone wants to talk to them. It's not charisma in the way we usually think about it. It's not charm or wit or having interesting stories. It's calibration. They read the room's emotional temperature and they adjust themselves to match it first, then gradually shift it. They don't come in hot when the room is cold. They don't bring intensity to a space that needs gentleness. They flex, they adapt, they flow. And here's what this creates over time. People start associating your presence with ease, with comfort, with safety. They don't consciously think, I should tell this person my concerns. They just find themselves doing it. The words come out before they've decided to say them, and afterwards. They wonder why they opened up so easily. They'll often say, I don't usually talk about this, and they're telling the truth. They don't. But around you, in the environment you've created, in the emotional temperature you've established, talking feels natural. Holding back feels harder than speaking. And that's when you know you've moved beyond technique into mastery. When influence becomes invisible even to the people experiencing it. Now we arrive at something critical. Everything I've shared with you, every principle, every technique, every strategy, it all collapses without one foundation: character. You can learn to create environments. You can master strategic silence. You can plant conversational seeds and calibrate emotional temperature. But if you're doing it from a hollow center, if you're doing it without genuine care for the people you're influencing, it will eventually fail. Not might fail, will fail. Because people have an instinct for authenticity that operates below conscious awareness. They might not be able to articulate why they don't trust you, but they'll feel it. And once that feeling settles in, no technique in the world can remove it. I've seen this destroy careers, destroy marriages, destroy legacies. Smart people who learned all the right moves but never developed the right heart. They could make people talk, they could gather information, they could create the appearance of connection, but over time, people felt used, manipulated. They couldn't point to a specific moment of betrayal, but they knew something was wrong, and they withdrew. Sometimes quietly, sometimes explosively, but they always withdrew. The difference between influence and manipulation is intent. Influence seeks mutual benefit. Manipulation seeks personal gain at another's expense. Influence builds, manipulation extracts. Influence creates relationship, manipulation creates transaction. And here's the thing about manipulation. It works in the short term, sometimes very well. But it's like taking out a loan you can never repay. Eventually, the debt comes due. The people you manipulated realize what happened. And you lose not just their trust, but their respect, their goodwill, and any future possibility of genuine connection. So before you apply anything I've taught you, ask yourself this question: why do I want people to talk to me? If the answer is control, stop right here. If the answer is advantage, stop right here. If the answer is power over others, you're on a path that ends in isolation. But if the answer is connection, if it's understanding, if it's genuine desire to know and serve and support the people around you, then everything I've shared becomes not just effective, but ethical. Not just powerful, but purposeful. So let me tell you about a woman named Amara. She taught primary school in a rural village in Kenya. Small classroom, 38 children, ages 6 to 12 altogether because the village only had one teacher. When Amara started, she taught the way she'd been taught. Stand at the front, deliver information, ask questions, expect answers. The children sat silently. They memorized what she said. They passed her basic tests, but nothing was alive in that room. No curiosity, no excitement, no real learning, just compliance for 2 years. Amara pushed harder. She prepared better lessons. She used more examples. She raised her voice to project energy. Nothing changed. The children remained passive, present but not engaged. Then something happened that changed everything. Amara got sick, really sick. She had to miss 3 days of school. The village had no substitute teacher, so they simply left the children in the classroom with their books and told them to study quietly. When Amara returned, she expected chaos. She expected the children to be behind, distracted, having learned nothing. Instead, she found something remarkable. The older children had organized the younger ones into groups. They'd created games to practice mathematics. They'd acted out stories from their reading books. They'd taught each other songs to memorize facts. In 3 days without her, they'd learned more than they typically learned in 3 weeks with her. And they were excited about it, alive with it, when Amara walked in. They rushed to show her what they'd discovered, not what they'd been told, what they'd discovered. That moment shattered something in Amara's understanding of teaching. She'd been trying to fill empty vessels, but the vessels weren't empty. They were full of curiosity, creativity, intelligence, and capacity. They didn't need her to give them everything. They needed her to create space for them to find it themselves. So Amara changed everything about how she taught. She stopped lecturing. She started asking questions that had no single right answer. Why do you think the river flows faster after rain? She stopped giving all the information. She started giving partial information and letting the children investigate the rest. This book says there are 8 planets, but your older brother's book says 9. What changed within weeks? That classroom transformed. Children who'd been silent for years wouldn't stop asking questions. Students who'd struggled began teaching others. The room buzzed with energy. But here's what happened that Amara never expected. Parents started coming to her. My child won't stop talking about school. What did you do? Other teachers from neighboring villages visited to observe. The regional education officer came and was so impressed, she asked Amara to train other teachers. All because Amara stopped trying to control the learning and started facilitating it. She stopped extracting responses and started creating conditions where responses happened naturally. This is the model for everything we've discussed. You're not a lecturer delivering information. You're a facilitator creating conditions. You're not a manager controlling outcomes. You're a gardener tending soil. You plant, you water, you remove weeds, but you don't make the seed grow. The seed grows because that's what seeds do when conditions are right. Your job is conditions. Your job is environment. Your job is removing obstacles and providing nutrients. The growth happens by itself when you approach influence this way. Something shifts in how you see people. They stop being targets. They stop being audiences. They stop being resources to extract value from. They become partners in a process, co-creators of dialogue, participants in mutual discovery. And this shift changes everything about how you show up. Your presence becomes invitational instead of extractive. Your silence becomes spacious instead of awkward. This is sustainable influence. This is the kind that compounds over years and decades. This is the kind that builds legacy instead of just results. Because people remember how you made them feel long after they forget what you said. They remember whether they felt safe or threatened, known or analyzed, respected or used. And those memories determine whether they'll talk to you again, whether they'll recommend you to others or warn others away. So yes, learn the techniques, master the principles, understand the psychology, but build it all on a foundation of genuine care. real curiosity, authentic respect for the humanity of every person you engage with. When you do that, making people talk stops being a skill you perform and becomes an overflow of who you are. They talk because being around you feels like coming home, like being known, like being valued. And that's not influence you have to maintain with effort. That's influence that maintains itself because it's rooted in something real, something true, something that serves not just you, but everyone it touches.